Have you ever asked yourself how far you will go to make things right? What measures will you take to correct the wrongs you have caused? Or have you already gone one too many steps too far in wanting to remedy a wrongdoing? Whatever your answer is, I think we can all agree that we are familiar with the feeling of desperation or perhaps frenzy or mania when we feel absolutely trapped in a situation we have created and we now want to undo. The commonly used metaphor to illustrate this rather suffocating feeling is the wild animal in a cage or a wild animal backed against a wall, lashing out at anyone and everyone daring to come near it. And whilst we may have resorted to desperate measures during desperate times, bearing in mind that the word desperate is a relative term in these conversations, only a few of us act in a manner that will end up creating even more damage, hurt, and even death. When someone does resort to the absolute worst of ways in a moment of desperation or when in a frenzy, the aftermath, the devastation can be absolutely horrendous for all parties involved. And this is exactly what happened one night in Manila on the 2nd of June 2017. This is the story of the Resorts World Manila attack. Welcome to Lagim, a Filipino true crime podcast. I am your host, Christine, and thank you for tuning in today's episode. If you are new to this podcast, please make sure to follow me on Instagram at Lagim Podcast and follow this podcast also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That way, you will not be missing any more new episodes of Lagim. Make sure to also join us on Facebook and our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Lagim, a Filipino true crime podcast on Facebook. I am also on YouTube and TikTok, so make sure to look up Lagim Podcast on those two platforms as well. When in doubt, all important links to our social media accounts are in Lagim's Instagram bio. Before I proceed with the story, please know that some details in this episode can be very upsetting. So please take care of yourself whilst listening. When people talk about what happened at the Resorts World Manila Casino, they usually start with the sequence of events on the 2nd of June at around midnight. However, the carnage that would later shock the world started way before midnight, the day before on the 1st of June 2017. At around 4 p.m. on the 1st of June, a lawyer named Elmer Mitra Jr. and former Manila police officer Alvin Cruzin met with Jesse Javier Carlos, a former civil servant at the Department of Finance. All three shared something in common: the world of casinos. Cruzin, after a career with the police, became a casino financier, whilst Carlos was fond of gambling in casinos. Mitra, although not having any obvious connection to casinos as per the reports at that time, did lend money to Jesse Carlos, apparently for the latter's gambling problem. It is assumed that Mitra and Cruzin met up with Carlos to ask for the money they had lent him. The three apparently met at the Resorts World Manila for coffee at the Maxine's Tower. Afterwards, all three of them got into Mitra's gray BMW car and traveled along Paco Walk, where CCTV caught sight of them around 10 o'clock in the evening. Around this time, people who were around that area suddenly heard gunshots, and before anyone could figure out what had happened or where the gunshots were from, eyewitnesses saw and heard a car crash and flip over. Eyewitnesses would later recount that one passenger emerged from the car wreckage. He looked like he had a limp and made sure to walk away from the crash site as soon and as quickly as possible. First responders would later find Mitra and Cruzin dead, but not as a result of the car crash. Both died of gunshot wounds to the head from behind. The investigators would later theorize that a fight may have escalated within the car, and since it would later come out that Carlos was in a bit of a financial bind, seeing as he owed these two men money, he may have just snapped. Unlucky for Mitra and Cruzin, Carlos was at that moment armed. Whether they knew this or not is still unclear. Carlos, for whatever reason, then decided to do something so extreme that it defies all logic. After walking off the crash site, Carlos would be spotted by CCTV walking up to his house and re-emerging around 11 o'clock in the evening. Another CCTV would record him getting out of a cab at around 12:07 in the morning in front of the Resorts World Manila casino. It was during the viewing of this CCTV footage later on that the police managed to put together some of the pieces of the events from the 1st and 2nd of June. They identified Jesse Javier Carlos as potentially the man who escaped the car crash and who was responsible for what happened inside the casino. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. So what happened when Jesse Carlos arrived at the casino? When Carlos got out of the cab he took to the casino, he could be seen to be wearing plain clothing and a backpack. He was a tall man, and that was immediately noticeable, but nothing out of the ordinary. He was also seen limping his way into the casino, also something unremarkable. This would later, however, help the police in connecting Carlos with the murder of Mitra and Cruzin, as I already mentioned. So, at that moment in front of the casino, nothing seemed off at first glance. However, we would later find out that Jesse Carlos had been thrown out of that casino before and was therefore prohibited from coming back. I therefore wonder why this was not picked up by the security staff in the CCTV monitoring rooms. In any case, CCTV footage then showed Carlos taking an elevator leading to the parking areas. He got off the second floor and proceeded to the parking area where he was seen opening his backpack and taking out a mask and ammunition vest. He put both on, and as he finished doing so, he could be seen taking out a rifle. With seemingly calm certainty, Carlos headed to the casino through the second floor parking area. In front of him, as we could see in the CCTV footage, was a metal detector and one unarmed security guard and some other personnel. He did not even pay her any mind and proceeded to bypass the metal detector, quickly pulling out his M4 assault rifle, threatening anyone who was attempting to stop him. He then opened fire into what was then called the Prosperity Lounge, and people at the nearby gaming table and the individuals near the metal detector, including the security personnel who was trying to stop him, made a run for it. Soon enough, widespread panic set in, and the casino guests and customers were running around looking for exits, desperate to escape whatever hell that just broke loose. The female security guard who attempted to stop Carlos then had the presence of mind to radio all casino employees about what had just happened. Investigators would later reveal that around 10 minutes past midnight, a call came through to the Villamor Police Community Precinct. A police officer was informed that armed men had managed to enter the casino and had opened fire. Police Senior Inspector Vicente Barameda quickly decided to deploy a team to the casino. The quickness with which the information could be passed on to the police could most likely be attributed to the female security guard who made sure that her colleagues at the casino were warned about the attack immediately. I would assume that her warning spread really quickly and eventually made it to the police precinct. Meanwhile, Jesse Carlos could be seen on CCTV walking to the gaming area, all the while shooting at tables and TV monitors. Footage then showed how he arrived at a certain area with at least 8 visible gaming tables. He continued to shoot, and from one vantage point, he could be seen dousing one gaming table. All in all, he ended up dousing 3 gaming tables on the second floor gaming area. He then set fire to these tables and did the same thing later to some slot machines, as well as the dining area, meaning he set fire to carpets, tables, and chairs. CCTV footage also showed how Carlos placed his bag onto one of the burning gaming tables. Later, investigators would learn that this bag contained bullets because only a few seconds later, one could see how the burning bag exploded multiple times, creating gunshot sounds, reinforcing therefore the belief of the guests and staffers in the casino that there must be more than one shooter. Carlos then continued to shoot afterwards, moving with intent as if in search of something. Meanwhile, casino staff was informed that the emergency protocol had been initiated and the evacuation of around 12,000 guests and staff needed to be started immediately. Outside of the casino, there was a flurry of activity as well. By 12:13, 3 police teams had been positioned at the south and west entrances of the casino, as well as the east entrance and the back of the Resorts World docking and fire exit area. The teams were first and foremost directed to enter the premises and assist the building's security in evacuating civilians. The evacuation of both guests and staff should have gone without a hitch, and in most parts of the casino, it did, despite the shooting and the fire that was breaking out on the second floor. However, bear in mind that widespread panic had completely set in, and at this point, and in the midst of the screaming and shooting, someone shouted something about terrorists and ISIS. This did not help the situation, and it drove people to take cover quickly in case the shooting increased in intensity or in case of a bomb explosion. Naturally, the first instinct of anyone trying to escape that type of situation would be to look for any exits, which most people did, but the exits had become so crowded that a lot of the staffers and guests could not wait until the exits were cleared. They did what they thought was the next best thing. They took cover in the bathrooms and other secluded areas within the casino, hoping to ride out the attack until the police could come and take down the shooter or shooters. The decision to ride out the attack in the bathrooms and other closed-off areas of the casino would later prove fatal. As for the gunman, Jesse Carlos can be seen on CCTV again at around 12:18, heading for the area behind the casino cashier, also known as the casino's safe room. He entered the chip bank room after he tried several times to force open the security doors by shooting at locks on those doors. It became clear to investigators later on that this was Carlos's motive, to steal money. What Carlos did not and could not know, however, was that no cash money was actually stored behind those doors, just chips. So Carlos did the next best thing and took around 113 million pesos worth of high denomination chips. After that, it was time to make his escape. I suppose Jesse Carlos knew that he had raised enough hell for the authorities to have arrived at the scene already, and he would be correct. Around 12:20, various police teams and fire trucks had started arriving at the scene, getting ready to not only extinguish the fire and continue rescue efforts, but to also learn more about the shooter or shooters. They knew they had to take him or them down as soon as possible before more people died. As the night progressed, top brass like Director Oscar Albayalde of the National Capital Regional Police Office had arrived at the casino to get a better picture of what was going on. They would soon realize that the situation was far from under control. By 12:46, several reports had come in about people sustaining injuries from the stampede that resulted from guests urgently wanting to leave the premises. However, whilst emergency responders were growing worried about the injured civilians trying to get out of the casino, they could not know that a considerable amount of people were still trapped in the casino bathrooms and other closed-off areas. They did not necessarily know about Carlos dousing gaming tables and the dining area and then starting a massive fire on the second floor, but this reality would soon set in for those who were trapped in the bathrooms and other secluded areas within the casino. Slowly but surely, the bathrooms started filling up with smoke from the fire around them. The people in the bathrooms were too scared to come out of hiding, hearing gunshots and fearing that the shooters would find them. So they stayed put, wanting to stay covered and wanting to stay alive. Now, the nightmare in the Resorts World Manila Casino was not yet over by a long shot. After Jesse Carlos took the 113 million pesos worth of high denomination chips, he now needed to make a run for it, as I've already mentioned. Meanwhile, the police officers and casino security personnel coordinated with each other to enter the building in order to take down whoever started this attack. Up until that moment, the police and the security personnel were still very much in the dark about who they were exactly up against. They entered the building not knowing how many shooters they would be encountering or where they were located. The police officers had to find a way to get eyes on the shooters, and the only way they thought they could do so was to coordinate with the casino personnel in the CCTV monitoring room. Unfortunately, the personnel manning the CCTV monitoring room had already abandoned their post after the shooting had begun. The police therefore knew that they would be operating blindly unless they themselves made it to the CCTV monitoring room. And so they headed for that area in the casino, hoping that every action after that would lead to the swift apprehension of the shooter or shooters. Now, I realize that in telling this story, you have to really imagine having at least 3 pairs of eyes in order to understand that so many things happen simultaneously and in quick succession. Whilst the police were trying to find the CCTV monitoring room, Jesse Carlos, who badly needed to find a way out of the casino building, was suddenly not so sure where to head. CCTV footage would later show that he paced back and forth into the stairwell and to a room adjacent to it a few times. He was looking worried and unsure about which way to take. Around 10 minutes past 1 in the morning, Jesse Carlos can be seen going into a door in the stairwell. A few minutes later, the CCTV footage would also show armed police officers heading into the same stairwell Carlos had just left. According to reports from that time, the police were vaguely aware that a gunman was in that area after having reviewed the CCTV footage in the monitoring room, but they did not know exactly where he was. A few moments later, a security personnel surveying the stairwell again heard footsteps coming from behind a door in the stairwell. Carlos suddenly emerged with his rifle ready. The security personnel spotted him and ran to alert the others. The security person opened fire at Carlos, who also fired back. Now, according to the security personnel who fired at Carlos, Carlos apparently had been hit and afterwards made his way up to the fifth floor into the Maxime's Hotel, a hotel that was part of the casino complex. Now, put a pin on that because the assertion by the security personnel that Carlos was hit and therefore made his way up to the Maxime's Hotel was later questioned. Anyway, Jesse Carlos could then be seen moving around the corridor and then forcing entry into one of the rooms, room 510. Let us also put a pin on this whilst we quickly look at what was going on in other parts of the casino as well as outside of the casino. Now, other police teams were assigned to look for and retrieve casino guests and staffers still, but they could not even do so properly because of the thick smoke that had now enveloped the inside of the casino, therefore reducing visibility and also making it hard for everybody to breathe. At some point, the police teams were also slowed down by ceiling iron beams that had collapsed. The structure of the casino building was slowly giving in, and it was imperative to get anyone and everyone out as soon as possible. The police realized pretty much from the get-go that they needed more help than just the casino's security personnel. They enlisted the help of the military who arrived on the scene at around 1:27 in the morning. The Armed Forces of the Philippines sent 4 teams to help the local PNP units trying to deal with the situation in the casino. Some 20 minutes later, more fire trucks, police, and even SWAT teams arrived to assist the teams that were already at the casino. Now, if you've ever been near or by the Resorts World Manila complex, you know that it is located right in front of the Ninoy Aquino International Airport. Airport security were notified of what was going on at the casino, and they immediately decided to secure the airport in case this was an ongoing terrorist attack that could potentially spill over into the airport. The main gates of all 4 terminals of the airport were shut down for a brief time until airport security could be sure that there was no threat to passengers or anyone else in the airport. Now, meanwhile, the team that was able to gain access to the CCTV monitoring room, remember those guys? They saw how Carlos went up to the Maxime's Hotel. This was essentially the first solid lead as to who they were up against and how many and where he was. And this is really where we pick up where we just left off when Carlos forced his entry into room 510 at around 1:50 in the morning. CCTV obviously did not pick up what he did as soon as he entered the room, but what the footage did show was that Jesse Carlos exited the room a little bit later, dragging with him some linen sheets and a blanket from the hotel room. He then could be seen starting a fire using the linen sheets and the blanket. The fire was left in the hallway, therefore risking another fire outbreak. Whilst you might think this was some sort of random maniacal act of arson, you will have to think twice because Carlos knew exactly what he was doing, or at least I thought so. Setting the linen on fire and leaving the burnt material in the middle of the hallway, I think, would have made it harder for any police officer to pursue him because of all the smoke and the obvious danger that the fire posed. Unfortunately for Carlos, though, the fire did little to deter the police teams in tracking him down. Now, this part of my research was a bit tricky, so stay with me here. My research has led me to initially believe that police eventually figured out that Carlos was in the vicinity of room 510, or perhaps even inside it at around 1:50 or even 2 a.m. I even dared to take a peek into Wikipedia, something that I really don't like doing, and they've recorded the moment the police finally found Carlos as 1:46 in the morning. However, Sources like Rappler, the Manila Times, and even the CCTV footage that was eventually released at that time told a very different story. The confusion I had whilst researching this is only a tiny part of a sort of bigger conspiracy theory that popped up around the time of the casino attack. Doubts arose when the PNP seemingly could not get their story straight as to how Jesse Carlos died and how they found him when they did barge into room 510. I therefore included a screenshot of the CCTV footage I found online. And if you look closely at the timestamp on the upper left corner of the screenshot, and if you squint hard enough, you will see that the police arrived in front of room 510 around 3:09 a.m. So I have decided to go with that timeline. If you have any objections or any knowledge that is not publicly known, if you know of any research sources that you think I have overlooked, please share those with me so I can make the necessary corrections. And I will make sure that I will also record a sort of correction episode for this one. It is very important for me to get these things right. So now that I have disclosed to you and given you a bit of a lecture of my research difficulties, essentially, we will still not get to the events of around 3 o'clock in the morning because I have to cover what happened outside of the casino around 2 o'clock in the morning. Around that time, the Resorts World Manila Twitter account finally announced that the building was on lockdown due to a shooting. Around 20 minutes later, PNP Chief Director General Ronald de la Rosa, or Bato de la Rosa, as he is more popularly known, arrived at the scene. 10 minutes later, 6 teams of the PNP Special Action Force were ordered to clear the 4th, 5th, and 6th floors of the Maxims Hotel. Now, it is unclear to me whether this was just some sort of follow-up action, since I can assume that the emergency protocol earlier that night included the evacuation of the hotel guests as well. Now, search efforts to find casualties and trapped guests continued between 2:30 in the morning until 6 o'clock. The police would later report that they managed to find a few employees in the basement area of the casino, whilst 3 employees were rescued in the Maxims Hotel VIP parking lot. 2 non-Filipinos were found on the 3rd floor of the hotel, and 10 other people were rescued from the 2nd floor fire exit by the Bureau of Fire Protection. By 2:45 in the morning, the news outlets were firing out headlines and alerts left and right about how the attack was by a local operative of the terrorist group ISIS. Now, I can imagine that this was speculation at this point, but at least one news agency, the Agence France Presse, reported that the SITE intelligence group, which monitors terrorist organizations and their activities, were very much confident that the gunman inside the casino was in fact an ISIS operative. Of course, we know now that this was not the case. Jesse Carlos was not an ISIS operative. I have a few more things to say about this aspect of the case, so again, put a pin on that. A few minutes after 3 o'clock in the morning, we then see the CCTV footage of the police team who was finally able to locate Jesse Javier Carlos in room 510. In the footage, which was visual only, we see some of the police officers cautiously entering the room and some of them backing out again. According to most news outlets, the police entered the room only to be overwhelmed by toxic fumes. And they also said that Carlos was nowhere to be found. Again, to reiterate, some videos on YouTube and even the Wikipedia entry about this case, as I already mentioned, maintain that the police found Carlos in the room and they found him already dead. But as I said earlier, I will go with the news outlets' timelines here as they make more sense to me. I will also talk about how the PNP found themselves contradicting each other. later on. So again, another pin to put on that. By around 3:30 in the morning, I suppose the whole nation was already up and glued to not only the live feeds of the different major channels, but also the videos taken by civilian citizens who were either near the casino or who were evacuated successfully. The police authorities asked the public to stop spreading unverified information, as I can imagine at that point, they did not even know anything definitively yet. By 3:45 in the morning, the Ninoy Aquino International Airport terminals were finally reopened after being shut down for around 2 hours. Half an hour later, at around 4:15 in the morning, the PNP talked to the media and debunked the ISIS claim. Instead, they disclosed that they believed the attack to be robbery related. At this point, the PNP chief was able to say with certainty that they have knowledge about how this gunman broke into the casino safe room and stole millions worth of casino chips, some of which were actually recovered during the hunt for the gunman around the building. By 4:45 that same morning, Chief Inspector Kimberly Molitas, spokesperson of the National Capital Region Police Office, or NCRPO, talked to the media and had the difficult task of disclosing to the public and the media that people had died of smoke inhalation inside the casino. You will remember earlier that I mentioned how a few people took cover in bathrooms and secluded areas, as they were under the impression that there were multiple attackers in the casino. Sadly, the smoke overpowered these individuals one by one. The guests and staffers fell unconscious and lost their lives. By 6:20 that morning, reports started to come in about the police disclosing how Jesse Javier Carlos had been found at last. According to the accounts of the police officers and the security personnel at the casino, Carlos's remains were found in room 510. He was severely burnt, and there was talk about how his remains were essentially charred at this point. Now, this was odd to a lot of people since the police had already been inside the room before, and surely they must have seen Carlos's body there already. I suppose it is possible that due to the toxic fumes, the police could not spend a lot of time in the room until the fumes subsided. So let us try to go with that theory for now. By 8 in the morning, Chief De La Rosa faced the media and described Carlos as a lone wolf who burnt himself. This was quite a different statement from an earlier one he made about Carlos dying at the hands of the police team that found him, indicating that Carlos had died because of a shootout. It seemed to those listening to De La Rosa that he was sticking by the burning story. This was when the PNP got into hot water for saying different things. This led to confusion and suspicion. De La Rosa explained that most probably Carlos doused himself with gasoline, slipped himself under the covers, and then set the bed on fire. De La Rosa also said that when the police were finally able to step into room 510, presumably, as I said, after the toxic fumes had cleared, Carlos was already dead. The team in 510 took pictures of Carlos's remains, and these were passed up the ranks within the PNP. These pictures were eventually released to the media, something that I personally disagree with. I get that this person had done something horrendous, but I can imagine he had family and friends who probably wished they did not see those photos splash all over national and even international television. With the story about Carlos's apparent self-immolation, the confusion about any prior contradicting statements should have been put to bed right then and there. However, later that day, Oscar Albayalde and presidential spokesman Ernesto Abella said in separate statements that Carlos actually shot himself in the head after setting himself on fire. That added, of course, to the confusion as to how Jesse Carlos actually died. Suffice it to say, any confusion or suspicion that the public or the media might have held at that point, they definitely did not let go of those quite easily. Moving forward in our timeline, we now look at the retrieval efforts by the police and also the security personnel. These efforts continued all day, from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. By 11 o'clock that morning, the retrieval team or teams counted at least 38 casualties, including Jesse Carlos. An hour later, Albayalde, in that statement I mentioned before, also stated that Jesse Carlos, still unidentified at that point by the way, may have been mentally disturbed. Albayalde also seemed to suggest that maybe Carlos's motive was not robbery at all because despite the many casino chips he managed to steal, he should have known that he would not have had the chance of cashing them out without alerting casino security anyway. Of course, these are mere speculations by Oscar Albayalde, and personally, I did not quite understand why he felt the need to go in front of the media and the public to disclose his personal speculations as to Jesse Carlos's mental status or his motives. I thought that for someone so high up in the police authority, he should have thought through this kind of disclosure because him going in front of the media seemed very premature, slightly desperate, and maybe just a tad unprofessional and unethical. But that's just my personal opinion, and of course, I digress. Nevertheless, in the same press conference by Oscar Albayalde, he also said that he doubted that the police could definitively conclude that this attack on the casino was an act of terrorism. Reports from those retrieving the casualties from inside the casino would later show that Jesse Carlos had actually not shot anyone per se. Those who died in the attack died of smoke inhalation or as a result of the stampede at the exit doors, meaning Carlos did not shoot at any person, but rather shot at objects to perhaps clear out the casino to ultimately rob the safe. With the revelation in these reports, the pathway of the police's investigations should have been cleared and should have just focused on that alone. However, the waters would be further muddied when an alleged ISIS member claimed that yes, ISIS was responsible for the Resorts World attack. An ISIS member called Semyon al-Mujahid said as much in a pro-ISIS Telegram channel. As a response to this sudden and new development in the case, then Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana needed to make a statement to the media and public that, of course, nobody was ruling out that ISIS could be involved in the attack. He specifically said, quote, "The police and intelligence people are investigating. We are not yet ruling out that this is an ISIS act. It is so easy for ISIS to claim responsibility. Whether true or ISIS is just riding on to a done act, we still do not know." End of quote. At this point, we would need to move forward a little bit in our timeline. By the next day, the world had heard about what happened. Embassies in Manila had already told their citizens to be cautious when traveling to the capital. Travel advisories were released by the embassies of the US, the UK, and Australia. But whilst the world was puzzling over why this had happened, the families of those who were injured and who died had slowly but surely made their way to the casino in search of answers and of their loved ones. It became clear to most of these families that the casino management was very much lacking in initiative. They did not provide the families with updates and real assistance. It was around this time as well that a lot of the families started pointing their fingers at the casino management and the security lapses within the casino as causes for the many casualties, something that the casino management vehemently denied at that point. By June 4th, President Duterte weighed in on the issue and also expressed his doubts that the attack on the casino was an act of terrorism. On the same day, Jesse Javier Carlos was finally identified. Details about him were released to the public. The public would learn that he was 42 years old at the time of his death and that he, as earlier mentioned, used to work for the Department of Finance. As also indicated earlier in this episode, Carlos had a big gambling problem and was rather heavily in debt due to this problem. The media would later release a few more details about him, such as that he used to be assigned to the Department of Finance's one-stop shop office, but had to be discharged from that post because of issues in relation to his statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, or SALN. With the kind of publicity that the casino attack generated all over the world, the government may have felt pressured to set up a House committee investigation as soon as possible. This investigation was finally set up on the 7th of June. Stephen Riley, the Resorts World Manila Chief Operating Officer, finally admitted that yes, there had been lapses in security. I suppose the ongoing police investigation made it clear not only to the public, but also to the casino management itself that such a prominent and central establishment had nothing or no one but a lone metal detector and one unarmed security guard serving as the first keepers of the gate, so to speak. Anyone could see that this was inadequate. During the hearing, Resorts World committed itself to paying each of the victims' families 1 million pesos. Those who were injured would be paid 500,000 pesos each. Lawmakers also then proposed to file a bill to essentially transfer the power to grant casino licenses from PAGCOR, or the Philippine Amusement and Gaming Corporation, to the House of Representatives. It was even considered at that point to revoke the current license held by Resorts World Manila. Although PAGCOR did not go that far, sure enough, by the 9th of June, PAGCOR suspended Resorts World's gaming license pending the results of the ongoing investigation. Resorts World Manila also publicly revealed that they had hired an international security firm to review its protocols. From what I understood, the casino, or the building in general, had to close for 4 weeks, and in that period, management took time to review its protocols and come up with better ones. Resorts World Manila was dealing with an unprecedented amount of pressure, not only from the government, the affected families of the attack, the victims, but also from its own shareholders. The Philippine Stock Exchange showed at that time that almost 2 weeks after the attack, Resorts World Manila lost around 7 billion pesos in market capitalization. Its parent company, called Alliance Global, lost around 8 billion pesos in market value. The operator of the resort casino had to go into massive damage control, reassuring its shareholders that it would exert all efforts to preserve and defend the company's provisional gaming license following the suspension by PAGCOR. And let us not forget that the casino also had to deal with refurbishing the interior of the casino following the attack. I am sure that they had a big insurance policy that could cover the cost of that, but the time needed to refurbish the casino was time lost in terms of profit. On the 14th of June, a mere 12 days after the attack, the House Committee on Public Order and Safety, the House Committee on Games and Amusement, and the House Committee on Tourism held their second hearing into the Resorts World Manila attack. In this hearing, they invited the casino security team who was supposed to man the CCTV monitoring room. You will remember that by the time the police arrived at the monitoring room, they realized that it was abandoned. We would find out during this hearing that the personnel within that room abandoned their post a mere 13 minutes after they first heard the shooting. Other witnesses were also heard that day. The House Committee panel heard from funeral home employees who saw the deceased victims of the attack after they were brought to them. More importantly, the House Committee panel heard testimonies from several police, hotel, and casino security personnel who admitted that there was a lack of coordination amongst those teams deployed to pursue Jesse, Javier, Carlos. The last day of the hearing was on the 21st of June 2017. In this hearing, more witnesses were heard, but what was most interesting for me was hearing from the Bureau of Fire Protection, who eventually discussed the possibility of a handbook and joint training exercises for firemen and police officers to prepare them for attacks, such as the one from the 2nd of June. The fact that this was not already a thing in a post 9/11 world remains a mystery to me. To conclude the House Committee hearings, the House Committee panel said that it was recommending charges against Resorts World Manila. As we now know, the House Committee concluded in 2018 that no charges would actually be filed against the casino, despite the loss of life on the 2nd of June and despite the many admitted lapses in security and judgment. Now, when I was researching this case, the following issues were the most pertinent to me, and I thought that at the very least, these issues should have merited recommendations of charges against Resorts World Manila from the House Committee panel. Whether any court case initiated by the panel would have succeeded is a different matter, but at least the victims and the victims' families would have had their day in court. Anyway, these are just a couple of the most pertinent issues that I have seen whilst researching this case. Firstly, the security staff manning the CCTV surveillance room, as I said, fled and abandoned their post a mere 13 minutes after the shooting started. What the police did not know right away, because they were not informed ASAP, was that the hotel security personnel transferred to their backup CCTV room in the Remington Hotel. Management did not tell the police about this until much, much later, hours after the attack. My second issue was about the lack of coordination. There was a lack of coordination amongst the staff that led to the stampede at the exit doors. People were trapped and a lot of them died of smoke inhalation, as we already know. There was also a lack of coordination between law enforcement and the hotel security personnel that only came to light during the second committee hearing. It was also revealed in that hearing that at one point a gunfight broke out between a police officer or some police officer and a security guard who was in civilian clothing because there was so much confusion and a lack of communication at the scene. This gunfight probably also contributed to additional fear within those people who were still hiding in the bathrooms and other secluded areas. My third issue was with the head of security at Resorts World. The head of security greatly embellished his background and experience. I would not have had any problem with a lack of university degree or any academic credentials if you can show me that you have had extensive experience and practical training in security management, but no. Armin Gomez, the head of security of Resorts World Manila, claimed he had a decade's worth of security training and experience. He claimed to have had a short stint in the early years of his career in the police or military. He even claimed that he was admitted to the prestigious Philippine Military Academy but had to be discharged later for personal reasons. He would also be questioned about his claims that actually he never went back to college and therefore never finished or obtained a degree. Again, this would not have been a problem if he actually had solid evidence that he knew what he was doing and had a solid understanding of risk and security and all the issues in between. I felt like he did not even have this and may have gotten the job by other means than pure merit. Now, I know I took a bit of a detour there, so let us go back to our timeline. By the 29th of June 2017, PAGCOR allowed Resorts World Manila to resume its gaming operations after presenting to PAGCOR their casino security protective action plans. The president and chief executive, Kingston Sian, said that security protocols will be updated and upgraded moving forward. Now, you might probably ask if Resorts World Manila suffered any other consequences. Well, I'm here to tell you that whilst the House Committee would not see it necessary to recommend charges later on, as I already said, the PNP did announce around a week later in July 2017 that it would file criminal charges. Police Director Oscar Albayalde stated, quote, "The Supervisory Office for Security and Investigation Agencies will finalize and submit their findings, which means they are ready to file charges of negligence resulting in multiple homicides." End of quote. He then went on to say that the families of at least 3 victims had come together to file a criminal lawsuit against Travelers International and NC Lanting Security Specialist, the security firm that was in charge of security at Resorts World Manila. Now, for the life of me, I could not find anything about whether the PNP actually ended up charging the casino or whether this lawsuit by the 3 victim families ever bore any fruit. Now, if you know anything about these aspects of the story, please do let me know. Suffice it to say, most people moved on quite quickly after the attack, at least those who did not really lose loved ones. Resorts World Manila may have taken a hit financially, but it really did a serious job of not only repairing and refurbishing the casino, doing away with any physical reminder of the tragedy that took place there, but they also made sure that their PR campaigns were irresistible. By September 2017, the casino saw a big influx of guests and visitors. In a year on, the casino hosted the same numbers of guests, if not more, pre-2017. The building's interior was also rearranged so that the casino premises were moved to a different floor instead of keeping the gaming tables and other casino games on the second floor. Resorts World Manila launched YouTube promo videos promising a better and safer experience in their hotel and casino. Even when I arrived in the Philippines back in 2019 and passed by the building on my way to my Airbnb, there was absolutely no hint or indication that something awful had ever happened there 2 years prior. I saw a bunch of tourists going in and out, looking relaxed. There were teenagers milling about outside, and there was a steady coming and going of guests arriving and leaving the premises. Life looked normal at Resorts World Manila again. And yet, I cannot help but think that life has been anything but normal for the families of those who died and those who were injured. I get that Resorts World Manila paid out money for those who died and who were injured, but in the grand scheme of things, those amounts were not enough. If I look at this from an English lawyer point of view, I can imagine that a civil suit could have resulted in a much higher payout, as in damages and compensation. Resorts World Manila, I believe, did not make those payouts from a place of pure altruism or perhaps remorse or guilt. It was a smart financial choice, knowing that litigating this case in court could have come at a high financial price, which, sure, they could theoretically afford. However, having the shadow of a civil litigation looming over the attempt to rejuvenate the business and the building could have also affected the company's social standing and reputation, not only domestically, but also internationally. So I think announcing these payouts pretty earlier on after the attack was a smart move to essentially disarm the victims' families whilst they were at their most vulnerable. Again, this is just my opinion, and if you know anything about any civil or criminal case, let me know because I really could not find anything online. Before I finally end this episode, I must say that there were a few aspects of this case that I did not deem very helpful in the narration of the story. A lot of these things were, I suppose, side issues, but I consider them still important. So let me touch upon some of them as a sort of epilogue to this episode. During the time of the attack, for example, Mindanao was under martial law, and President Duterte had contemplated putting the whole country under martial law as well, sparking fears of having another Marcos-like era. Another issue that I have briefly touched upon earlier in the episode, but not really fully explored, was Jesse Javier Carlos's manner of death. An autopsy that was conducted on Carlos's body would later apparently reveal that Carlos had sustained one gunshot wound to the head in addition to being burnt to death, which was what both presidential spokesperson Abella and chief director Oscar Albayalde had said in their separate statements after the attack. Questions then arose as to how this manner of death could be possible. Did Carlos set himself on fire before turning the gun on himself? Sounds plausible, but conspiracy theorists out there fervently believe that Jesse Carlos was actually trapped in the burning room, room 510, when the police officers had arrived, who ultimately shot him and left him burning in the room. The chief of the PNP crime lab would disagree. Chief Superintendent Aurelio Tranpe explained the following in the hope to shed some light on the confusing details of Carlos's manner and cause of death. According to him, Carlos's lone gunshot wound to the head was self-inflicted. The initial belief that Carlos was successfully shot by that security guard who found him in the stairwell, something I have mentioned earlier in the episode, was therefore debunked. Chief Trampe said that the wound or the blood seen on Carlos on the CCTV footage could have been from something other than a gunshot. He also denied that Carlos poured gasoline on himself before setting himself on fire. He came to this conclusion because some parts of Carlos's body, including his stomach and some parts of his legs, were not totally burnt. The conclusion ultimately was that he doused the bed in the room instead of himself, set the bed on fire, and then shot himself. Lastly, you may have noticed that I did not necessarily give a lot of background when it came to Jesse Carlos. I did not think he deserved it, but if you want to know more about him, Rappler's Patricia Evangelista wrote a very good piece on him. It is the first linked in the show notes if you are interested in reading that. If you want a more watered-down version, then do have a look at Wikipedia because they have quite a few interesting details about Jesse Carlos there. As always, my heart goes out to the families of the victims who died in the casino attack, and also to those who survived and who now have to survive a life with PTSD and other mental health problems. Lastly, and you might be surprised by this, my heart also goes out to the friends and family of Jesse, Javier, Carlos. They are also innocent victims in this story, and they will have to live their lives knowing that someone they loved or used to love was responsible for the lives of so many innocent people. And with this, I want to end this episode and thank you all for listening. I also want to thank you for getting me to 100,000 downloads. I am still a bit gobsmacked, to be honest. My wish was to reach that milestone at the latest on Lagim's anniversary on the 4th of December. But here we are, and I could not be more grateful. So thank you very much for your support. Also, if you could, please show my new podcast, Asia in the Shadows, your support as well. All the links you need are in the show notes. It is a really good show with interesting cases and well worth the listen. But hey, I am biased. If you want to support my content and support me as a podcaster, you can always subscribe to Lagim's Patreon or make a one-off donation through buymecoffee.com. All the links to these platforms are also in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for everything and for your support. Maraming salamat at mabuhay.